Okay. Hi, the startup founders, great builders, innovators, health tech entrepreneurs, and medtech founders. Hi, all. Hi again from Pitchworks. This is me, Gokul Rangarajan, general partner of Pitchworks. And we have another operating partner, Mr. Sudarshan Srinivasan. Today, end to
Hi.
end, we're just going to have a Sudarshan says hi, right? So today's podcast is pretty much about just getting to the basics of what is venture clienting, right? What do you mean by venture clienting? How startups could essentially leverage this new method or the existing so-called method, which has been renamed or recoined right now, and how it's been utilized. Most of the founders whom we are trying to put them into program don't understand what is a venture clienting. So we thought we'll do this podcast, make this term aware, how it is, what's the pros and cons, and how any startup founder could leverage this on 0 to 1 stage. That's pretty much this podcast is about. So pretty much in this next 10 to 15 minutes, we are just going to talk about what is venture clienting, right? And we're just going to have a make it more conversational as much as it's possible. And we would also love the listeners to involve in the conversation through blogs, or you can mail us any given point of time, or pick any of our calendar slots to have a conversation about venture clienting, right? So essentially, we're going to cover all these topics about what is venture clienting, how is it totally different from the existing software a purchase model for a corporate out there. How is it going to be really useful? Why startups should embrace a venture clienting into their early building process? Pros and cons, of course. Any instrument comes with their pros and cons, and you also have our own Pitchworks way of implementing a venture client model, which we have done it for a couple of deals, and we are going to explain and with a ideal example of how it's going to be useful for a startup and our own framework of venture clienting, right? So that's pretty much what we are going to talk about. Let's kickstart. Sudarshan, so you built yourself, bootstrap yourself to a way, to a point of two gaming studios and an AR/VR startup, and you have also built yourself a medtech startup on your own, right?
Yeah.
So, were you really aware of this term called venture clienting back then, like 6, 7 years ago? For me, it's just a new term. I just discovered that 3 years ago. So, when did you actually discover about venture clienting?
Pretty much recently, because when I was doing that, even though I work with larger corporates and stuff, I didn't know the term exists or the framework exists, right? So it's relatively new for me in the past few years, not like 10 years ago when I was doing or like working with corporates.
Yeah, it's pretty much every new term into the venture model is coming in, going out, and people are still speculative about the new acronyms which has been coming there, including venture clienting also. But I think in by and large, a lot of stuff within venture client makes sense, right? So let's explain to the founders out there or the corporate what is venture clienting, right? So by and large, a lot of corporates are not working with emerging technologies. Let's not coin that as startup, but they're not working with emerging technologies. But there's a huge wall in between a startup and a corporate, which is not allowing them to actually work with any new technologies or any new innovations, or it can be any new processes out there, right? So it could be a regulation problem, or it could be a legal hurdle, or it could be an internal compliance hurdle, or it could be even a time-consuming process through which they're not able to adopt any new technologies, right? So that venture clienting is ideally solving this corporate startup collaboration by and large. That's what venture clienting by mean, right? Adding on top of it, venture clienting is just a easiest way for a startup to actually collaborate with a corporate, or a corporate to actually collaborate with and startup, right? So, how traditionally they've been collaborating, the minute a corporate wants to talk or wants to work with a startup, they immediately talk about CVC, corporate venture capital, or they've been talking about M&As, right? They have to acquire a piece of a startup. They have to acquire the startup on the whole into their ecosystem. But here too, there is a lot of issues. There is capital issues. The founder doesn't want to sell. The overall process itself is time consuming, and there is a lot of legal issues, which is not allowing a corporate to have a piece of equity in a startup or whole of the startup of the whole, right? So people have been thinking about this in a large, right? Like almost there has been a decade of discussions on this.
Mm-hmm.
Initially, there was corporate venture studio model, which kind of evolved into venture clienting, right? Uh, that's pretty much venture. That's pretty much the problems of a startup, and the solution to it is venture clienting, wherein it's very simple, right? You don't own an equity in a startup. As a corporate, I don't own an equity in a startup. As a corporate, I don't own the whole startup of the whole. Instead, I would just try to work with the startup technology. If you go to a pizza shop, I just order a pizza instead of buying an equity in a pizza shop, right? If you go to Starbucks, you probably want to understand, you probably want to taste a cup of coffee instead of buying an equity in a Starbucks, right? So then if you like the cup of coffee, you probably want to discuss terms on franchising, or you want to discuss the terms on owning a piece of the retail, right? So venture clienting accelerates the method of or collaborate accelerates a startup or a corporate to collaborate with each other, right? That's the fundamental concept of venture clienting. I've known that last 3 years or 4 you've been working on a medtech. You successfully exited from a medtech startup, right? I would love to know, was there any opportunities back then for you to actually work with the corporate, or did you come across any such if not maybe the term, did you come across any such models across back then when you were like an entrepreneur before your VC stint?
Yeah, I guess like in the previous startups, we were able to work with the startups as one of our early customers. How it started is it's more like a custom-made solution, but when I learned more about corporate clienting, it is kind of what we did as well, right? It is very like super similar. You work with the corporate, you get their knowledge, and you still retain your own IP. It's not like you're building for them. So I was building my tool, and then they had some they were sharing a lot of insights and knowledge on how they wanted it, working with your potential customer, right? Or like a likes of your potential customer gives you a lot of value in terms of how they want to use it. You might be thinking like one feature, and then they will be like giving you a lot of insights on other feature. So it's like a founder cannot figure all the things out, right? The corporate has you know uh, you're solving their problem basically, or the likes of them, right? And when you have someone who's constantly giving you feedbacks, how they want it and all those things, it's nothing like it.
Right. I completely am with you on this, man. Right. So, Sudarshan, I also want to touch base on why the fundamental concept of why a corporate would need a startup, right? So what kind of collaboration are they expecting from a startup or given any company, right? Because they have all the resources. Why don't they just kind of go and kind of purchase an established solution out there when compared to a startup solution, right? The one common difference between just buying a solution and venture clienting is you're actually the corporate is actually engaging in a startup, right? So it's the decision of the corporate, not just the startup, right? So ideally, a corporate would have ideally different problems. They will have an innovation problem, like you have the famous example of Blockbuster, right? Blockbuster just didn't innovate or die. They just didn't innovate. So they have to they have to shrink it to just one last store which is out there, right? On the other hand, Netflix, which invested on streaming, kind of raised the race, and they are almost having an elaborate or sufficient amount of market share, right? There are a lot of established companies out there which is actually are in a state where they have to innovate, or they're left with no other option. There will be multiple examples, right? Kodak, which didn't innovate, or the early generation technology companies, which includes IBM, or there could be like millions or hundreds and hundreds of Fortune 500 companies which kind of missed out the race because they didn't innovate. Even most innovation friendly companies like Google kind of missed out on the OpenAI ChatGPT race because they kind of missed out a little bit on this. Innovation is super competitive, right? So we we from Pitchworks, we have been always encouraging corporates on trying to adapt new tech. If they could not do it, we are backing projects. We are backing projects which are like backed by corporates. At the same time, we are backing the founders who are helping the corporates innovate, right? So their challenges could be internal challenges, just organizing challenges, or they could be, let's say, a corporate wants to cut down on the software cost, or they are not seeing any proper growth opportunity cost, or they are not having in-house talent who could like foster that, right? On the other hand, you also have corporates who could not easily adopt to new technologies. Like let's take an example of Golang, or example of even EV, or let's take an example of Python. They'll not be able to quickly move to the technology because of their own internal culture things or talent criteria, or because of their own internal challenges which they are not able to even immediately adopt, right? In those cases, you have startups coming out externally from them and helping. Of course, you could go with M&A, spend 1 year or 1.5 years of time, and realize that this is not a good fit for them. There'll be a huge loss of time, money, and effort for the startup as well as for the corporate. Or in other terms, you could say, why don't you run a free trial, or why don't you run a paid pilot, saying that you engage with the startup and understand whether this is a good technology for you, and then you could decide at any given point of time. Buying an equity in a startup is a totally different game. You could engage that. That's pretty much venture clienting is,
Yeah.
isn't it?
And the corporates would have a different set of speciality, and the startups are like a built for it, right? You let's say you're building an AI team or like an AI startup. The whole team composition, everything would be totally different from what the startup would already have. So they don't have to build a team. Even if it's an internal one, they have to start building it like a startup, right? For that particular function or to solve that particular problem. So when there is another expertise that is already available, already built, so working together is a better option.
Right, I completely agree. So since you bought this, an ideal example of a venture studio out there is BMW Startup Garage. So it said that BMW is an established firm out there, so much technology out there, but an averagely funded startup, let's talk about a seed startup in an early stage, building an AI solution. Let's talk about, BMW building an, their in-house software solution. Like what you said, an AI startup in the same space would have like 3 to 4 times budget of a listed company like BMW, because they kind of are dedicated for this. Wherein BMW's focus will be more on manufacturing, will be more on their core space. So the ideal solution is corporate employing or engaging with a startup who has that expertise, who has that experience, and who's also dedicatedly having a budget who could solve the problem for them instead of building all in-house. Isn't it? Right? So that's pretty much venture clienting is, right? So one could ask, how is this different from a traditional software? This is the common question what we kind of encounter with both the corporates and a startup, right? So one major common difference is you're engaging with a startup. For a corporate, you're engaging with a startup, which means the startup is totally uncertain, right? Wherein an established solution could have a longer stable solution value, right? Which means a startup will be there in 2 years to support you. The startup could be innovating and solving your problem, but could not be there. For a corporate, these are the risks, right? Would probably be having their own risk, wherein like 2 to 3 years you may shut down. You'll have internal problems. You have a chances of M&A. These are the risks what a corporate needs to consider. That's one fundamental difference which is there. Wherein a traditional traditional solution, the corporate all has to do is the solution is readily available rather than corporate, right? It's very transactional in nature. For example, a startup corporate wants a support software. They could just go purchase Freshworks or Zoho as a support solution, and because it's transactional in nature, right? And very limited in terms of, one of the cons is very limited in terms of customization and ownership, and you'll have a very clarity in terms of licensing. But still, why are corporates out there still trying to look for innovation? That's the whole norm of venture clienting, right? That's pretty much because they wanted to co-develop a very custom personal solution for their workflows. Number two is they are probably looking at a little more longer term, looking at acquiring a future equity in the startup or even an M&A, so that they can leverage that technology in future in a much more different ways. And you also have can if you're building along with the startup, you can build along with the startup according to your requirement, right? So both, when you have a team externally working for you, believing that both have a long perspective, either selling of equity, buying of equity, I think the synergy there is much more different, and the talent what you get is much more different, and the energy what you get out of the project is much more different. That's
Okay.
one of the vested interests of venture clienting. Do you have any other points to
No,
add here, Sudarshan?
no, that's pretty much it, right? So it's a long term goal. It's not like a very short term buying off the shelf product. It's creating a custom made solution that works for you, along with the very strategic interest.
Yeah, pretty much it, right? Okay, right? At the end of the day, we'll come to the problems of an early stage startups, right? So when you're bootstrapping, you're running on a road runway. Even I think now we are in a time where you have like all these seed deals and pre-seed deals are in an all-time low, right? So when you are very struggling to actually back up your runway, you're kind of trying to raise money and stuff like that. A deal of this sort will be a much more efficient, capital efficient, and much more, on a longer term. Right? That's one big advantage. But I would say one of the biggest advantages of venture funding is you own the IP yourself. You're not losing out on IP. What Sudarshan said, you're not losing out on your IP. It's still you're getting a validated market feedback from an established logo. Let's talk about BMW validating your product. Now, they used to say that HP is the one of the earliest venture clienting deal is between Xerox and HP, right? And IBM and Apple is one of the examples of venture clienting deals, right? So when you don't have so much resources or capital out there, you could still own an IP and get a validated uh, feedback from a established company who's actually working with you. That's one of the biggest advantages. Number three is you don't lose out on any equity also, right? You're working on a very where you might sell equity in future, but at this given point of time, you are working for a deal where you're not losing out on any equity, right? Single founders or two founders who don't have any other resources out there, you should probably consider venture clienting without going for fundraise or before going for an equity deal out there, or even going for family fundraise, right? So, and another biggest advantage I would say is, so when you, on an early stage, when you're building products on a very hustle mode or very faster mode, if software tends to break, irrespective of which team is building, there are only two options for it. You kind of, test it very robustly to make sure the product solution actually works. Other way of testing it is with the customers, right? Because there are a lot of use cases, a lot of scenarios, a lot of, workflows tend to happen. When you happen to do that, when you're working with corporates, you kind of have to have a delivery of building a robust product with them, along with them, because you can't allow the softwares to break, right? There are a lot of situations where me and Sudarshan face where you kind of have to deliver a healthcare product or a medtech product where the software tends to break at an early stage. The customer is pardoning, that's fine, but when you're working with corporate companies, you have the resources, you have the money out there, you kind of have to deliver on the promise. Equation is totally different out there, right?
Yeah.
Do you have any things to add here, Sudarshan,
No,
or
it was
will move on?
like
Okay,
yeah.
so yeah, so now we are going to talk about how does a startup, where does a startup comes in, right? The startups cannot come out and within the Pitchworks engagement program, the startups cannot come down and say, dude, I'm doing venture clienting, don't you come for me, right? It doesn't work in that way, right? So how within the Pitchworks overall ecosystem, how it actually works is Pitchworks does a lot of innovation consulting work for the corporates, right? We do idea generation workshop, we do a lot of stakeholder leadership training workshops, and we do an internal hackathon for the startups. What is the outcome of of all these activities? We kind of come up with ideas or problems, saying that these are the problems what we have. If we could solve for a corporate, these are the problems what we have, and if we could solve that problem for the corporate, we could potentially reduce the cost, or we could potentially increase our revenue, or we could potentially reduce the time what we are spending, right? These are the problems ideally a corporate has, right? So we kind of validate the problem again with other corporates, market validated, and we'll finally come up with an LOIs with the corporate, saying that corporate would say that I would give you money for building a solution on this sort. I would probably give a money for on this cost for building a service if you're providing me this solution at this cost, right? These are the problems what a corporate would come up at the end of the workshop or the activity, whatever you're doing, right? When the solutioning is actually, when the problem is actually identified, then usually what happens is the corporate ideally have to source out for solutions out there, right? One way of doing is implementing an existing solution out there. Another way of doing it is working with a venture clienting deal where they can co-build the solution and they can work along with the startup on the customized needs for them and also for a long-term benefit, right? That's when startups comes in. Let's say that out of 10 problems, we kind of arrive at 3 or 4 problems which the corporate is working, allowing us to work with a venture clienting solution. We bring in the startup there. That's when the startup founders comes in, understands the requirement, again signs and second level of service level agreement with the corporate along with Pitchworks, say that this is what I'm going to implement, this is the solution what I have, this is the solution I'm going to build along with you. You are going to commit me this much hours, Pitchworks is going to commit to you this much hours, and that's the entire gambit of venture clienting, right? This is the overall process, but what are the pros and cons for a startup? Like what we said, stable revenue, product, robust product, no IP loss, no equity loss. These are the advantages for a startup at an early stage. At the same time, you have a future advantages of you potentially raise from the corporate venture capital. You are actually saving time. Like ideally, a corporate startup right now is working on. Ideally, a startup right now is working on closer to 9 months for all this fundraising efforts. That's kind of cutting down, right? What are the cons? Of course, it comes with the cost. A lot of startups are, very slow. Ideally, if you are engaging with the Pitchworks deal, you are coming to a point where we already have a deal, and you kind of, coming out there when the deal is already there. We will potentially cut down on your sales cycle. But there's also other kind of things of you might, if you wanted to build a market for a product-led growth market, or if you want to build for an SME kind of segment, maybe corporate is not the right audience for you. You might want to say no to a venture clienting deal. Or if you say that I don't want to put all of my resources because corporate is time consuming, you might want to say no to that, right? And also corporates comes with their own integration challenges. They have their existing legacy ERPs, which might take a lot of time in integrating. So these are some of the cons of dealing with the venture clienting. It's up to the startup founders' ability or startup founders' personality to actually decide whether he wants a venture clienting or not, right? Yeah. So I just wanted to quickly give an overview of where the venture clienting, Pitchworks venture clienting program can be helpful to you. We do the business development upfront for you as a VC studio. We kind of bring in the deal for you. By the time we are talking and learning about this video, you might be interested in venture clienting. And if you are in the same space as we do, we kind of present a couple of deals for you. Then from there, you kind of work with the corporate in finalizing the service level agreement. And the corporate doesn't pay you on day one, right? So the Pitchworks there kind of finances you on the venture clienting deal and gives you money to build the product what you have to deliver to the corporate, right? You get your own IP. You don't lose out any money on this deal with Pitchworks, or you don't lose out any kind of equity with Pitchworks on this deal, right? Once you kind of deliver, you kind of agree on the service level agreement as well as support level agreement with the corporate, and you kind of mentioned it. And Pitchworks will be the client program manager for the deal, helping you deliver the project. And we will have a curated 12 months where you kind of balance your venture clienting deal as well as your next level of work, what you have to deliver to the market as well, right? And we also have an entire gambit of developers. We have go-to-market professionals. We'll deliver, make sure you deliver the entire process to you for the client, and we kind of help you execute the program end to end, right? So ideally, you have to come up with an idea or an executable prototype, work with us on the venture clienting deal, and make sure you kind of deliver the promises what you're giving to the corporate, right? So another eligibility criteria what we are looking at is we are looking at an most important thing we are looking at for an eligibility is experienced people, mostly gray hat founders or experienced founders who have that background in that area. We're also looking for people who have experience in product development, so that we don't have to get into the day-to-day operations for it, right? So if you are building something, if you are intending to build or you're building something in health tech, or you've built something in health tech, med tech, clean tech, climate tech, and gaming, we might be potentially be a fit to you in the long term basis for these deals what we have. And if you are able to, you are okay to commit with us for a long term, then we'll have a potential collaboration where we don't lose much on equity and still have a potential deal. And part of the deal also, we have an in-house 250-member team on development, which we can support, extend the support on delivering the project to you. That's what we do. So a part of this video, we are attaching a checklist for you to check whether a venture lending deal is right for you or not. You have a look at it and uh, reach out to us or book a slot with us at any given point of time. If this is the right thing for you, happy to have a chat, see, explore synergies, and collaborate on the longer run. Right. So, Sushan, do you have any last note to add on this?
So looking forward to catch up with the potential founders. We are onboarding more and more people to the program, and we have like people like close to 4 or 5 startups already enrolled in the program, right, Gokul?
Right. We have been already executing a couple of. We have already delivered 3 venture lending deals, and we are looking forward to deliver at least 5 venture lending deals each and every year, along with startup funding, financing. We are keeping venture lending as a base arm on this. On top of which, we are helping startups build their own products on the longer run, right? So initial incubation period will be there, where we are working with you and deliver you on the longer promise, right?
Good.
That's pretty much about it. Thanks a lot if you're still there watching our video. Looking forward to